Henry David Thoreau said it best. That government is best which governs least. And I think this principle, this idea, is generally speaking an idea that this country was founded on. When our government was founded, when Jefferson and Washington and Franklin and Adams and all the others got together and helped work on the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution and later the Bill of Rights, I think it was Adams that wrote the Federalist Papers. The idea behind all of it, even though they disagreed with each other on some of the details, was that the government should be as intrusive should be as little involved in the day-to-day lives of the citizens as possible. Okay, it was mainly there to defend the country and to oversee in a very general, hands-off way the common goodness of its citizens, to protect the citizens and to guard their liberties. Okay, that's what it was generally set up as a force for. And it was to be as intrusive in the citizens' daily lives as possible. And where we're at today now in 2019 is quite the opposite. The government now is extremely intrusive in our day-to-day life. It has invaded every nook and cranny. Maybe that's a thing. I don't know. And if it is a thing, they've definitely invaded it because they're trying to take over everything that they possibly can. But every aspect of our day-to-day life, this is inarguable. It's a fact at this point. They want to take over healthcare. They don't want to have anything to do with religion, but at the same time, they preach their own religion, which is secularism or humanism, and they want that taught in the schools. Humanism is a religion, whether they want to admit to it or not, it is. So they have their own religion. Separation of church and state, my foot. Excuse me. So they're not even consistent on that point. They've engaged us in numerous empire building endeavors, pointless wars that drag on forever. We're still in Afghanistan. We're still in Iraq. They're talking about Iran. As we speak, President Trump has just declared, I think, one of the military branches in Iran a terrorist organization, which is an unprecedented move for a president in these diplomatic circumstances that we're in today. A lot of people are shocked that he went and actually took the bold step of doing this. I haven't looked into it, so I don't know whether I agree with his doing that. If they are a terrorist organization, then they should certainly be called out as such. But this is certainly not going to help our peace talks or our peaceful negotiations, or it's certainly not going to help with keeping peace between the U.S. and Iran, to say the least. Okay. Negotiations are ongoing with North Korea. Should they fall apart, it is not outside possibility that we will have to use military force to go into North Korea, and that brings China into the whole equation. Russia too. Our relations with Russia have not been that great recently, and so there's a lot going on. They're even talking today about the possibility of removing Maduro down in Venezuela. So using our armed forces, to topple yet another corrupt regime in another country that has nothing to do with ours, to get involved yet again in guerrilla warfare with terrorist organizations on foreign soil, with the purpose of deposing one regime and installing democracy. You cannot install democracy at the point of a gun, okay? You just can't. It violates the very principles that democracy is founded upon, which is free choice, right there. Free will, the freedom to choose, okay? The citizens choosing. And if you install something by force, you're removing that choice from them. There's nowhere. Where do we know for certain that the citizens in Iran or Afghanistan or Iraq or Venezuela genuinely, on the whole, want democracy or want us there helping? And if it can be proven that they do not want that, then we have violated the very principles right off the bat on which democracy is founded. It cannot be installed at the point of a gun. So I think it goes without saying that we have come a long way from what Henry David Thoreau said when that government is best which governs least. Okay? Thomas Paine also wrote about this in Common Sense, and there are others that have spoken more in detail on what Thomas Paine's actual philosophy was. It didn't just rest upon foreign relations, obviously, or foreign policy, that is. But the real question that I think we come up against, and I think increasingly as time goes on, and we don't see an answer to when will this corruption, when will these long-ranging wars end, when will the corruption end, when will the guilty in Washington actually face justice? As we see the Mueller report fall apart, and we realize that for years, it is now proven for years now that certain Democratic politicians and news media analysts who claim to be objective and so on, as it has now been proven that these people were lying for years, lying to us, that people like Nadler and Adam Schiff and Swalwell, these people that swore up and down that they knew that there was collusion, that they had seen the evidence for it, not that it was possible or probable or likely, or that the evidence led them to believe the best possible conclusion was that President Trump had colluded with Russia. No, they said with definite assurance and beyond the realm of just possibility or probability, they assured us that the evidence pointed directly to President Trump, irrefutably colluding with Russia. And now we know that's not true. And so it is obvious that these people have been lying to us for years. Again, Adam Schiff, Swalwell, Nadler, Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi, all of those ones who said that they saw evidence that Trump had colluded have now been proven to be liars. Where was that evidence? None of us have seen it. And then most importantly, Robert Mueller didn't see it when he exonerated Trump on the collusion front and determined that there was not enough evidence to convict him in regards to obstruction. And a lot of people have been complaining about William Barr being Trump's attorney general and saying that because William Barr is Trump's attorney general, his appointee, that Barr, of course, is going to have a biased opinion of the Mueller letter, the Mueller report. And so his letter, his analysis of it, his summary of it to Congress was biased and a lie. What they're forgetting and what they're honestly not, what they're dishonestly not telling the American public is that we're not emphasizing, choosing not to emphasize, which is another form of lying because it is a half-truth. It's removing, excluding truth to intentionally misinform people. So what they're misinforming the public about is that it wasn't just William Barr that read Mueller's letter, his report. It was also Rod Rosenstein. And you will remember that for those 2 years, Rod Rosenstein was basically a saint to the Democrat Party. This was a man who recused himself, generally speaking, from the investigation. And for that reason, they worshipped at the throne of Rod Rosenstein. No, Rod Rosenstein must not be touched throughout this investigation. We must not remove Rod Rosenstein. Rod Rosenstein this, Rod Rosenstein's that. Defend Rod Rosenstein. They loved Rod Rosenstein. And now they make no mention of him as being one of the parties who read with William Barr the report from Robert Mueller and gave the same consensus that Barr did, that there was no collusion and that in regards to obstruction, there was not enough evidence to convict, okay, or to charge or to indict, however you want to put it. The evidence was just not there. It was inconclusive. Does that mean Trump was completely exonerated? No, it does not. But does that mean that he was guilty either? No, it does not. And does that justify 2 years of people claiming that there was evidence, direct evidence? No, it does not. And so the question that people must ask as time goes on, as we're just thrust into all these nation-building efforts, all these pointless, endless wars, as we're deposing regimes left and right across the world with no end in sight, as there are always going to be corrupt regimes that need deposing. And so it is an endless exercise as these things continue and as the corruption continues and the guilty parties, the ones who lied to us. And if you want to learn more about the actual corruption in the Mueller probe, you would do well to listen to people like Dan Bongino, and as much as I'm not a huge fan of Sean Hannity, he's done some good work in this area. John Solomon and some others in proving that it was actually Hillary Clinton that colluded with the Russians, that it's been proven demonstrably, it's not even controversial at this point, that the dossier, the Steele dossier upon which the whole thing was founded was a pure fabrication. It was bought and paid for by Fusion GPS through the Clinton Foundation, through Hillary Rodham Clinton's campaign, the DNC, etc. They all colluded together to pay for and create this fake dossier. From there, they went and lied to federal judges to get a FISA warrant, from which they used to start spying on the Trump campaign. Okay, so there is a mountain of corruption there. And the question there is that now that it has been disproven that Trump colluded and that there are people that lied about this for a long time, where is the justice for those people? This is a serious question that people are going to have to start asking more and more. That how can good citizens stand by as corruption goes unchecked in Washington? What do you do about it? Really, we are giving voting as kind of our means for change in America today. But what if your vote really doesn't count for anything? What if you truly believe that by voting out one, you're just bringing in another just as equally bad as the one before? And even if you do vote in some good people, the system itself is so far gone and so corrupt that no amount of voting good people in is going to change it at this point. In other words, the corruption is systemic and irreversible. What if we have gotten to that point? And it's not a facetious question. There are people that are asking this, not just me. There have to be plenty of people asking this question by this point. In times past, even looking back to the 1800s, the question of corruption was pertinent even then. At a time when we would look back and say, what were they talking about? They have no idea what corruption is. They have no idea what that word even means in comparison to what we have before us today. Abraham Lincoln spoke about it when he said, America has become drunk on its own success and has become corrupt. J. Gresham Machen, the OPC pastor, said the same thing. This is not something that has not been noted and spoken about for a long time. This has been a long time in coming, and now I think we have reached the point where a genuine, legitimate question needs to be asked of whether the system is so far gone and is so corrupt at this point that just voting and public demonstration may not actually be enough. They don't care if you march in the streets, these politicians. Are you kidding me? Of what effect does that have at this point? Getting together and marching in the street with your signs. Now, it's working in France, but France is a country in which those things have always worked. They are a country that has always responded with demonstrations and rioting in the streets. The Yellow Vesters are nothing new as far as French history is concerned. But it's a real question here. And I think it's one that since the Civil War we haven't been really faced with at this level of intensity, because the corruption that is ongoing in Washington is so rank and so rooted and so deep that I don't know that just voting at this point could really change anything. I really don't, and I think we will reach the point very quickly here where citizens do have to start asking themselves what else can be done. What is required of a citizen in response to what we see before us as far as corruption is concerned. I just recently read a good book that kind of sort of has to deal with this. I also just read Civil Disobedience by Thoreau. That's why I chose to quote him at the beginning of this. Um, but since I am a Christian, I think we have to also ask ourselves that as Christians, how do you respond not only as citizens in the face of outright corruption, but also as Christian citizens in the face of a government that is not only becoming outrageously corrupt, but is also becoming increasingly secular and hostile to Christianity as well. And those two concepts go hand in hand, no matter, people will argue that, they will try to debate me on that, whether morality and goodness can actually exist without religion, without God, without Christianity. I would always argue that objective morality can never exist without God. Just as a side note, atheism cannot account for objective morality. By eliminating God, you have eliminated all the standards in which morality would come from. What they are left with then, because they assume that humanity has evolved from animals then, is that morality is just a construct of humanity, and it changes from one time to another, from one society to another, and that clearly cannot be the case. We know within us that there is a definable truth that transcends us and transcends time and transcends ever shifting cultures. Okay, but so yeah. As I said, objective morality cannot come from man-made laws. These such laws are subject to change. Therefore, what is right or wrong, if based on the state standards, would constantly fluctuate. Now, I think this is where we get into a little bit of touchy ground as far as like what does a Christian do in the face of a ever corrupt and ever secular government. There are those. I was listening to an interview with John MacArthur, the Protestant pastor with Ben Shapiro, actually, and he made a statement that actually surprised me by saying that in his opinion, in his mind, and he didn't really go into deep with it as far as explaining why he said this, but he said it could be argued that a Christian should not have taken part in the American Revolution. I do not agree with that, and that's partly, I bring that up because there are Christians like John MacArthur that would say that even in the face of outrageous corruption like we have today, even in the face of increasing secularization that is hostile to Christianity and is therefore going to instate laws that prohibit your religious freedom, that even in the face of that, and prohibit you from following God's law, that even in the face of that, you should submit to them. I can't believe that that's what he really truly is asserting, but he didn't flesh out the statement, so it's hard to say, and I haven't heard anything more from him on that topic. But I think it's very important that we do not fall into the trap of reading too far into, for example, Mark 12:17, where Jesus says, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar, and to God what is God's." A lot of people take that to mean, and there are other verses in the Bible that talk about how every leader has been instated by God and should be therefore respected and obeyed, whether he's a good leader or a bad leader. But I think people sometimes read too far into that to mean that no matter what happens, you should submit unto Caesar and render to him what is his, regardless of what is going on or what the laws may be or how corrupt or how bad things may be getting or whether his laws are taking away your religious freedoms, etc. They read too far into that, and they're attributing to it a scope of meaning that I don't think is there. The same way some people take the maxim to turn the other cheek and will actually totally argue against self-defense or violence of any kind whatsoever. Righteous wars would be something they would argue against and say just cannot possibly exist. And I want to state in this podcast that is absolutely not true. If you look through biblical history and also just human history as far back as the Reformation, Christians have disobeyed state law in in asserting and following God's law routinely. They do it in Scripture. You could say, well, the Reformation is not in Scripture, so we can't turn to that as a standard. The Bibles are only standard. Okay, you want to say that, but the Apostle Paul and St. Peter and many of the other apostles routinely disobeyed the charge to not preach the gospel. And there's many instances of this in Scripture. I have a couple written down. Let me just see here. Let me see. In looking to Acts 5:17 through 21. Let me see. Which I think, if I remember correctly, is the story of Peter. I believe it's Peter and some of the other apostles are thrown in prison for preaching the gospel, and the Holy Spirit, or depending on your translation, an angel of the Lord comes and breaks them out of jail and charges them with preaching the gospel in the town square. So there is God directly intervening and telling them to disobey state and local laws and preaching the gospel. The Apostle Paul routinely did the same thing and was beaten for it and stoned, etc., all because he did not obey men, but he rather obeyed God. The Bible is replete with people that do this. In addition, as I mentioned before, the Reformation, William Tyndale was known as God's outlaw. We wouldn't have the Gutenberg press, which was the first printing press, which was used to print the Bible, if people just followed the law and did not break the law in pursuing truth and God's commands. Martin Luther was considered an outlaw. John Calvin as well. These were all outlaws because of their stand for truth. So I think it is an egregious misreading of the text to say that a Christian must always just submit to the law before him. But that doesn't answer the question, really, that I originally put forward of what should a citizen or a Christian citizen do in the face of, and at what of such corruption, and at what point do you get to a point where the corruption is so deep and so bad that just mere voting, that mere peaceful protesting no longer would suffice. And me, myself, I am merely here just asking the question, and I think that, personally, I think the time is drawing nigh where you would have to look at other options. I just recently read a book by Francis Schaeffer called A Christian Manifesto. And basically, there's a quote from it that I wanted to read. Let's see here. Schaeffer says in it, and this is a quote from his book, A Christian Manifesto, "Any government that commands what contradicts God's law abrogates its authority. It is no longer our proper legal government, and at that point we have the right and the duty to disobey it." So, that doesn't really go into much detail, of course, and Schaeffer doesn't go into much detail in the book as to what actually you should do. He mentions revolution, of course, and of course I'm hinting at that to an extent. Will it come to that? I think honestly it will. I'm not going to cheer for it or encourage anyone to go out and commit violence, but I will make note of the fact that there are far more people that are actually thinking along the lines of revolution than people actually may think. I've seen documentaries that kind of go into this on the internet. I know from watching them and from reading articles and just from people that I know that on the dark web there are many, many tightly knit, interwoven, deep militia groups that are armed and very tight-knit communicating groups that are well prepared for the time when the government will try to implement martial law, or will try to abolish the Second Amendment and take their guns away. They are prepared for that. I know these groups have exist that I know that they exist because I've talked to some members of these groups. I know some of them. I would never mention names or anything, and I've seen their communications, and I've seen those communications on the dark web, which of course is like the Tor browser, the anonymous browser. You get to it through a VPN, etc. I don't really go around on it too much, but that's where they are. They're on there. These are people that are as anonymous as possible, not only in their use of the internet, but they don't have credit cards. Some of them don't pay taxes and have actually gone to court for it and won the right, you could say, not to pay state and federal taxes. So legally, they are not required to do that. And so they don't. They handle most, if not all, of their transactions through cash, so they are anonymous as possible. They're as off the grid as you can possibly get in the world today. Even their computers don't have IP addresses because they use Tor. All their email addresses are encrypted. I mean, these are people that do everything they possibly can to keep a surveillance state off their backs. You can call them paranoid, and a lot of people probably would, but what I think they are is prepared for the inevitable day when action will probably have to be taken. Have we gotten to the point, have we gotten so far down the rabbit hole that just mere voting, which is the defense mechanism that the Founding Fathers gave us, as far as legal means for change, when are we near that point where their legal means, their legal weaponry for us to change our destiny and to change and affect the corruption in Washington will no longer be a viable option? It will not work anymore. That we will have gotten to the point where that just won't cut it. That's a question I think more people need to ask, and I think as time goes on, more people will ask it because it's an inevitable question. It really is. It's only a matter of time before more and more and more citizens start to wake up and realize this is beyond our control. These representatives are clearly not representing us. They're representing their own interests. The government is not a creation of the people anymore. It is its own entity with its own interests, completely separate from the people that it claims to represent. And it is only interested in control and power, in establishing control and power in as many in as many areas of our lives as possible, and in protecting and maintaining that control and power. That's its interest, and in protecting its members. If you are a part of the elite establishment in Washington, then you will notice that you escape justice no matter what your crimes are. When's the last time a genuinely powerful politician was brought to his knees by the justice system? Name one for me. Even if you think Trump was politically corrupted and colluded, he escaped. Hillary Clinton will never stand trial. Okay? I don't believe it for a minute. As much as I would love to see it, I don't believe it. Bill Clinton will never stand trial. These are people that will escape the arm of justice in this life. The Republicans that are corrupt will escape justice in this life, unless citizens take action, of course. But as far as justice, our legal system, give me a break. Look at the corruption that this Mueller probe has exposed in the DOJ itself, the rank bias that was exposed by members of the FBI like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page, how this is not objective any longer, but these are political entities now. The FBI is a political weapon in a large way now, and they are being used for specific purposes to destroy political opponents of another party by the opposite party, by the opposing party. The CIA probably is being used in the same way. The NSA, all of these intelligence gathering services and communities have been compromised to one degree or another. We're just seeing it more obviously right now in the DOJ and the FBI. But give me good reason to think that the same thing isn't happening in the CIA or the NSA. I don't believe it. So, I think if we're honest, we're at a point now where you have to start asking yourself what more might have to be done. And again, I'm not cheerleading for anything, or for any violent demonstrations or anything of that nature. I'm certainly not advocating for it. But I am saying that most importantly, we are very quickly approaching a time, and I think the 2020, we always say that this election is the most important election of our time, but increasingly that is so. The midterms were important, and 2020 will be extremely important, not only because of my own personal bias, obviously, that I want to see President Trump elected again, but because of the obvious that if he is not elected, you're going to have, no, we haven't seen yet who the Democratic challenger ultimately will be, but nobody that's running right now is a true moderate, okay? You're increasingly coming down to a time where socialism has been unmasked. They no longer pretend that they're not socialists. We have naked socialism right here in front of us. And so we're increasingly coming to a time where that is going to be the challenge, whether the challenge between a democracy or a republic and socialism. And more people are starting to lead towards a socialist government. And my fear is that they will realize to their horror too late how evil that really is. Too late. Yeah. So if we're wise, we will ask the question now, before we get to that too late point, what more needs to be done. Anyway, that's my episode for the night. Good night, and God be with you.